Veronica ran down the street, waving her purse and smiling at the world because today was her first day at the restaurant. She had been searching for this job for so long, and finally, luck was on her side. Even if she was just a dishwasher, there was nothing to be afraid of. Official employment meant she could take sick leave if her son got ill, and the stable salary was a relief for her nearly empty wallet. However, her excitement vanished the moment she crossed the restaurant's threshold. The contrast between the beautiful guest hall and the kitchen was enormous. A mountain of dirty dishes awaited her. The floor was grimy, greasy droplets clung to the tiled walls, and chefs and waiters hurried about. The noise and bustle completely disoriented her. She stood hesitantly in the doorway until a stern-looking manager noticed her and shouted, "Are you the new one, the dishwasher?" Veronica nodded, and the man said sternly, "Why are you so late?" "Starting tomorrow, work begins at 7 a.m. Don't stand around, change quickly and get to work. And no slacking off." She quickly made her way to the utility room, put on a stained apron, a cap, and long yellow gloves. From that moment, hell began. She spent entire days washing and scrubbing pots and pans until they sparkled and reloading the dishwasher. Her feet ached and were swollen. The experienced staff often teased her, saying, "Watch out, don't wear yourself out, our Cinderella. You might run away by tomorrow. Get used to it, the work here is tough. Women tougher than you didn't last a week, so you won't be here for long." Veronica remained silent, diligently working, even though her strength was fading. She even fell asleep on the bus on the way home, her eyes closing from exhaustion. Veronica sadly looked at her red, swollen hands. The delicate manicure she had done just yesterday was now ruined. And this was only the first day. Yet a few large bills given to her at the end of the shift brought some joy. Veronica bought bread, milk for porridge, candies for her son, and went to pick him up from daycare. Michael joyfully ran to his mother, chattering all the way, while Veronica fought with her thoughts. "It's okay. I need to get used to it. At least we won't be hungry and we'll pay the rent on time, not always in debt. Life is tough, we have no one to rely on but ourselves." In the evening, after putting her son to bed and reading him a story, Veronica lay awake for a long time, trying to soothe the pain in her aching legs, reflecting on her life. Veronica's childhood was far from happy. Raised by a single mother on a meager storekeeper's salary, they constantly scrimped and saved. She never had new toys or clothes, she always wore hand-me-downs, a constant source of humiliation at school. Her classmates mocked her. While others received phones, scooters, and skateboards for holidays, she got only chocolate and cheap souvenir years, and that silly name, Veronica. She hated it. Why did her mother choose it? There was only one success for her studies. Her outstanding memory made her stand out in class, earning her praise from teachers. However, her classmates only laughed, saying, "You're poor, can't even afford lunch. No point in trying, university isn't in your future." Only her mother believed in her, assuring her, "Don't worry. I've started saving money little by little. By the time you graduate, I'll have a decent sum for your education. I want you to be happier than me." Veronica didn't attend the prom because she lacked a beautiful dress and didn't want to embarrass herself in front of classmates. Moreover, her mother fell ill. She coughed for a long time, thinking it was bronchitis, trying antibiotics and home remedies, but her condition worsened. She started eating poorly, always seemed tired, and had a persistent fever. When she finally went to the doctor and had an X-ray, the news was devastating. Veronica cried in secret, encouraging her mother. All the money she had saved for education went into treatments. Her mother underwent 3 rounds of chemotherapy, but her body couldn't endure it. Her mother passed away. Veronica was shattered, unprepared for the harsh realities of adult and independent life. Dreams of university remained just dreams. She had to learn to survive on her own. That's when Adam crossed her path. Veronica helped him prepare for his diploma defense, and soon feelings developed between them. Adam wasn't wealthy either, so they searched for part-time jobs together, even taking odd jobs like wallpapering for extra cash. Although their dates were simple, usually at Veronica's home or in the park, she cherished every flower or inexpensive lipstick. She loved Adam sincerely and unconditionally. Adam, however, was frustrated with their impoverished life. He wanted to escape this routine and often complained, "I'm tired of all this. Once I get my diploma, what's next? Becoming some engineer at my dad's factory and counting every penny again? Can't I own enough for a fancy car or a vacation on the Azure coast? I need to figure out a way to hit the jackpot. I won't bend my back like my parents until retirement." Veronica countered, "Darling, please don't be upset. There's nothing we can do. It's life, everyone lives like this. Let's get married, have a baby, and raise it together. Isn't that true happiness? We love each other, and that's what matters the most." Adam shrugged it off. "I don't want any kids right now. Not everyone lives like this, you just haven't seen another life. On TV, they eat delicacies for breakfast and drive expensive cars. That's what I want. Rich relatives never left a couple of million as an inheritance." Veronica sighed. "Well, I don't have that, just a grandfather in an old village whom my mom never talked to. For some reason, I've never even seen him, but I doubt he's a millionaire. Okay, dreamer, let's go to dinner." Veronica unexpectedly became pregnant, but the thought of an abortion never crossed her mind. For her and Adam, it was almost like starting a family, just needing the official stamp in their passports. However, Adam had a different opinion. He urged Veronica to get rid of the baby, citing financial difficulties. Veronica refused, determined to go through with the pregnancy. That's when Adam started distancing himself, disappearing at night, and the emotional closeness between them vanished. As the due date approached, Adam abandoned her completely, finding another wealthy and promising fiancé. The fact that she was much older didn't bother him. He was willing to bend over backward for her and her family, all for a life of affluence. He left money for Veronica's childbirth, but sternly stated, "I'll never acknowledge the child. It was your choice. I asked you to have an abortion. Our connection was a mistake, and it's a shame I realized it too late. I'll have a completely different life now, the one I always dreamed of. Forgive me and goodbye." Veronica cried and screamed, "But you don't love her. She's old, almost 50. Are money and status more important to you than love and our child? You're a monster." Adam didn't respond, slamming the door and leaving his former fiancée alone. Veronica went through extremely tough times and financial hardship. Exiting the maternity ward with her little one, she found herself facing the harsh realities of life alone. Money was scarce, and the child support barely covered food and utilities. Doing her best to get by, Veronica discovered a dusty piece of cotton fabric in the cupboard, retrieved an old sewing machine, and remembered what her mother had taught her about sewing. The young mom sewed onesies, diapers, swaddling blankets, and rompers to make ends meet. A helpful neighbor suggested money-saving tips, like grating an apple instead of buying expensive baby puree, or soaking cookies in milk, which kids also love. At the child health clinic, everyone wondered why she didn't use diapers, considering how convenient they were for both saving on laundry and ensuring the baby slept better. Veronica replied, "I'm against diapers, they're harmful." In reality, she couldn't afford to spend money on diapers, they were just too expensive. Catherine, who had known Veronica since childhood, sympathized with her and helped whenever she could, sometimes bringing pastries, other times sharing vegetables from her garden. She even looked after Michael while Veronica sought any kind of part-time work. Michael was a joy, showing remarkable development for his age. By his 10th month, he confidently took steps, and by the age of 1, he could eat with a spoon and express his need to use the toilet. When Michael turned 1.5, Veronica had to enroll him in daycare and start looking for a job. Fortunately, luck was on her side as the restaurant owner took pity on the young mother and hired her as a dishwasher. Veronica knew she couldn't afford to lose this job, especially with a small child. She endured everything, ensuring her son lacked nothing. With autumn approaching, warm clothing and new shoes were essential for the little one. Veronica didn't think about herself, considering she hadn't recovered much after childbirth and was still wearing the same clothes as many years ago. Initially, colleagues ridiculed her, out of fashion, no makeup, a small child, and no husband. But when the kitchen sparkled with cleanliness and the polished dishes shone, everyone respected her. Rumors even reached the director that the new dishwasher was a cleaning wizard. Bernard, however, found Veronica's face oddly familiar but was unable to recall where he might have seen her before. The director decided to praise Veronica, saying, "Veronica, I'm pleased with your work. You're a professional. I want to add a small bonus to your salary for your efforts. Keep it up." The young woman blushed, thanked him, and went back to diligently scrubbing a large pot. The administrator, Caleb, was less impressed. He commented, "Don't overpraise her. Let's see how she continues to work. After all, she has a small child. If he falls ill, we might need to find a new employee." Caleb was universally disliked, and he reciprocated by keeping the staff in fear, withholding tips, and often failing to pay bonuses. Veronica's life became somewhat easier despite the exhaustion. Catherine, always willing to babysit when Michael had a quarantine or was unwell, was a great help to the young mom. Veronica didn't have to take sick leave. One day, over dinner, Bernard shared with his wife Janet, "You know, a single mother with a little child approached me for a job at the restaurant. Initially, I was hesitant to hire her, thinking she might take a lot of sick leave. What kind of worker would she be? But then I felt sorry for her. She's so young, dressed poorly, clearly in need, but at the same time, she's so sweet, open, and attractive, even without makeup." Recently, I conducted another kitchen raid, and I must say this young lady turned out to be a hard worker. She cleaned the entire kitchen and dishes. She tirelessly scrubs plates all day long. I am very pleased with her. Janet tensed up as she saw her husband's eyes light up when he spoke about the dishwasher. She didn't like it at all. Her biggest fear was losing the source of her luxurious life and her husband. Why the enthusiasm? She knew of such poor girls, but resourceful and tenacious ones. She didn't need competition. She decided to get rid of this simple girl to be on the safe side. Veronica worked diligently, aware that she had gained an enemy in the form of the owner's wife. On one of the workdays, the owner gathered all the employees in his office, something that had never happened before. Everyone whispered, not understanding what was going on. Bernard and his wife, Janet, were sitting at the table in the office, a disagreeable figure staring at everyone with piercing eyes. The director cleared his throat and began an unpleasant conversation. "So, everyone," he said, "today my wife's gold pen disappeared from my desk. It was an expensive gift, and many of you have been working in the team for many years. We've never had theft issues, and I never thought of locking the office, but since this incident occurred, I'll have to check each one of you and inspect personal belongings. Who's first?" The chef pushed his cap back and frowned. "This is humiliating, Bernard. We've been working here faithfully for so many years, and you start with the newcomer. She arrived later than everyone else, and I'm 100% sure about my guys." The director looked at Veronica. She stood there, pale and frightened. He said, "Well, let's start with you, Veronica. Show me your purse, please. If you haven't stolen anything, you have nothing to fear." Veronica emptied her purse. Everyone stared, trying to see what was inside. Veronica felt like they were rummaging through her underwear. It was disgusting. The pen wasn't there. Suddenly, the owner's wife lunged at the girl, forcefully pulled her left pocket, and the ill-fated pen fell out. Everyone froze in amazement, and Veronica herself didn't understand how the pen ended up in her pocket. She never even came close to the director's office. Janet, not giving anyone a chance to recover, exclaimed, "Ah, you thief. Caught red-handed. Didn't even have time to hide the stolen item. Aren't you ashamed, scum? My husband felt sorry for you, took you in for work with a little child, and this is how you repay him? Bernard, fire her immediately so that others learn a lesson. Veronica cried and tried to explain that she hadn't taken anything and never left the kitchen. The janitor, Kimberly, also saw what happened but decided not to interfere. She might get accused of being an accomplice. The director had no choice but to fire Veronica publicly. She collected her payment, crying, and left. Janet continued to pour it on the thief. Veronica didn't know what to do. She lost her job once again. She and Michael were left without money. Moreover, she felt like she had been dragged through the mud, and she was innocent. The next morning, Michael woke up undisturbed. No one took him to daycare, forced him to brush his teeth, or put on annoying tights. The little boy rubbed his eyes in surprise, clapped his bare feet, and went to find his mom. She was lying on the bed, crying. The worried boy asked, "Mom, are you crying? Did someone hurt you? Then I'll grab a sword and protect you. Aren't we going to daycare?" The little one had a severe speech impediment, and Veronica, amidst tears, laughed, hugged the toddler, pressed him to herself, and said, "You're my little defender, thank you. We're not going to daycare today or tomorrow. It's the weekend, so let's go wash up and cook some porridge." Michael shouted, "Hooray!" and agreed in his joy to eat all the porridge just to stay home with Mommy. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Veronica went to answer it. On the doorstep stood a distinguished middle-aged man with glasses and a folder in his hands. He looked at the girl and asked, "Is this Veronica?" The girl nodded in surprise, but still didn't understand. The little one, seeing a stranger, hid behind his mother's legs. The man walked into the hallway, opened the folder, and said, "My name is Clinton. I'm a notary. Your grandfather Derek made a will before his death, stating that upon his demise, his house would be transferred to you. Here are all the real estate documents. Congratulations, you are now its rightful owner." Veronica was dumbfounded. Grandpa has been dead for a long time. I didn't even know anything. My mom didn't communicate with him, and I don't know why. I never even saw him. Where is he buried? Do you know? The notary replied, "Your grandfather passed away almost 6 months ago. We were looking for you for a long time. He gave us a completely different address, and he's buried in the city cemetery. Well, I must go. I have a lot of work. Goodbye." The woman held the documents in her hands and thought about how callous she was. She was already an adult and could have found out exactly where her grandfather lived, kept in touch, and helped. After all, he was an old man, a kindred spirit, but she never thought of it. However, her grandfather seemed to know about his granddaughter, given that he transferred the house to her. It felt awkward. She would have to visit, at least to go to the cemetery, say thanks, and repent. Veronica checked the route on the internet. It wasn't far, only a 40-minute drive. She spent the whole day with her son, and in the evening, took him to the neighbor, Catherine. She told her everything and asked, "Can Michael stay overnight with you? I want to go take a look at my inheritance, but I don't want to drag my son there for the first time. What if the house is in ruins? How can I spend the night with a child there? Keep an eye on him. I'll be back tomorrow. I'll pick up my son right away." Catherine gladly took care of the little one. She enjoyed playing with him. Veronica started to get ready. As a precaution, she took a thermos of coffee, sandwiches, a flashlight, and even a folding knife, just in case. After all, she didn't know exactly where she was going. The girl drove for a whole hour to reach the house, which turned out to be on the outskirts, near the forest. She looked around. The house was sturdy, large, made of oak. It would stand for another 100 years. Only the yard was overgrown, and the shutters were boarded up. She pushed the gate, and it opened. Veronica entered the yard and was astonished. There was clearly a well-trodden path, the grass was flattened, and the lock was new and modern, unlikely something her grandfather would install. She thought, strange, if Grandpa died 6 months ago, then who is living here now? It feels quite unsettling. She circled the house from the other side and found another entrance. Although it was clearly abandoned, the door's hinges were completely rusted. The girl found something resembling a poker and leveraged the rusty hinges. After about 10 minutes of effort, she managed to open the door. Veronica stepped inside and turned on the flashlight. Goosebumps ran down her spine again. The house seemed walked in, and the footprints were quite fresh. The mud had almost dried. They led to the basement. Suddenly, muffled moans and some commotion came from there. The girl got scared, her legs turned weak, and her heart pounded, but curiosity overcame fear. She cautiously approached and pushed aside the heavy trapdoor. She called out, "Hey, who's there?" From below, there came an immediate response, "Help! Save me, please! They kidnapped me, get me out of here!" Veronica climbed down a fragile staircase. On the dirty floor, amidst cobwebs and dust, lay a man. He was beaten, blood had dried, and he was firmly tied to a sturdy shelf. The girl even screamed, "Oh my God! Who did this to you? Hang on, I have a knife, I'll try to free you now." She started cutting the ropes, struggled for a long time, but she managed to free the man. However, the most challenging part was lifting the exhausted man upstairs, as he could barely climb the steps. Veronica helped him as much as she could, and finally, they made it upstairs. She laid the stranger on the couch and collapsed next to him, unable to move, catching her breath. Then she handed the captive a water bottle. He drank eagerly, licking his cracked lips. Meanwhile, she called for an ambulance and the police. She saw that the man's condition was critical, with a deep head wound. He was on the verge of losing consciousness. Besides, there was the fear of the criminals returning. She definitely couldn't handle them alone. Meanwhile, the man was eating a sandwich and telling his story. "My name is Edward. I run a small clothing business, a profitable one if managed wisely. My best friend Gregory tried to kill me. I trusted him a lot, never expected this from him. He brought me here, beat me severely, and demanded that I transfer the company to him. But I spat in his face. That's when he went berserk, hit me on the head several times with a stone, and I don't remember anything else. I regained consciousness tied up, unable to move. I thought it was the end for me. I was ready to die, reciting prayers as I know them, asking the Lord for a swift death. I understood that no one would look for me here. The house must have been abandoned for a long time. I don't know how long I lay there. Then I heard footsteps, started calling for help, but the scream remained stuck in my throat. I had no strength. Luckily, you heard my moans. Thank you, you're my guardian angel. What's your name?" Veronica introduced herself, and Edward took a sip of coffee. Suddenly, he turned pale, felt nauseous, and lost consciousness. Panicking, Veronica searched the house for a first aid kit and smelling salts, but the ambulance arrived just in time, followed by the police. The medics provided initial care and rushed the victim to the hospital. Veronica went to the police station, telling them everything she knew. She returned to town until the kidnappers were found and all evidence was gathered in that house. She also planned to visit Edward in the hospital the next day. The following day, Veronica cooked soup, bought groceries, and went to visit the rescued businessman. She couldn't stop thinking about him all night. She felt sorry for the man who had been through so much. She timidly entered the hospital room, and Edward smiled upon seeing her. His head was bandaged, his abrasions treated, and he looked much better than yesterday. Veronica began unpacking the food. "Hey, I decided to visit you. Are you okay with that? I've been worried about you all night. Here, I brought soup, you need strength to recover." Edward was taken aback and replied, "Thank you, Veronica. You're an amazing girl. I've never met anyone like you, coming to the aid of a stranger and even worrying and visiting in the hospital. I appreciate it. I'll gladly eat the soup. The doctors say I miraculously survived a severe hematoma and concussion. They won't let me get up yet, but after the procedures and IVs, I feel better. Can you give me your phone? I really need to call work. My supervisor, please." Edward talked for a long time, gave instructions, recounted what had happened to him, and tried to find out Gregory's whereabouts. His supervisor told him that Gregory had been acting like the boss in the last week, claiming that the director had gone abroad permanently and entrusted the company to him. Many employees were skeptical, waiting to see how it would end. Now the truth had come out, and Edward hoped that the authorities would catch the criminal soon. After the conversation, Edward had his meal, and he and Veronica chatted for a long time. Veronica honestly shared her difficult childhood, a failed romance, betrayal by her fiancé, her beloved little son, and the recent job loss. Edward nodded sympathetically, encouraging her. "Don't worry. Your Adam is a fool, trading such a girl for money. I would never do that for anything. Forget about everything. My childhood wasn't sugar-coated either. I'm an orphan, grew up in an orphanage, and Gregory was my best friend. We got into all sorts of trouble together, ran away many times, fought, stole buns from the cafeteria, everything. When we turned 10, a wealthy elderly couple came to the orphanage. They wanted to adopt a boy, and not a small one, so they chose me from many others. Lucky, you could say I pulled the lucky ticket. I asked my adoptive father many times why they chose me specifically. He said I resembled their son, who died of an incurable illness. They raised me with love and care. I graduated from the Economics University. My father introduced me to the business and handed over the reins. I didn't forget about Gregory, don't think that. We promised each other in childhood that we'd help each other throughout life. My parents didn't welcome my friendship with Gregory for some reason, they never liked him. But being adults and having my own business, I found Gregory and hired him immediately. I wanted a trusted person by my side who wouldn't betray me. But, as it turned out, everything went the opposite way. My own friend wanted to kill me. It still doesn't make sense to me. That's the story. Now, what about you? What are you thinking of doing? Any plans? Veronica sadly replied, I don't even know. My son is only 2 years old. No one will hire me with such a young child. I have nowhere to live. It's a dead end. But I really like my grandfather's house in the village. I'll move there with my son. It's not too far from the city, but there's clean air and silence. I'll move there as soon as your story with Gregory is over. However, I don't know what to do there. Edward thought for a moment and suddenly suggested, I have an idea. Can you sew? I could take you a good sewing machine and materials to the village. You can sew orders from home and take care of the child. That way, you'll have money. Start with simple things, and if it goes well, I'll have you make jackets and children's clothes. What do you think of that proposal? I'll help you in the beginning, and we can fix up the house together. Just let me recover first. Veronica brightened. Thank you, Edward. This is a way out. You're saving me. I know how to sew, my mom taught me. I think I can manage it. Michael is calm and won't be a bother. He dislikes daycare, we go there every day with tears, and he's been getting sick often. Plus, I can rent out the apartment, so there's additional income. Maybe, indeed, everything is for the best. Well, take care of yourself. I'll go then, and we'll start moving slowly with my son. Can I come by tomorrow? Edward gently took her hand and said softly, You know, Veronica, you're amazing. You don't give up, you love your son, and you strive for him. You saved me, and I sincerely want to thank you, help you settle into this life. Believe me, all the troubles are behind us. Everything will work out. Come tomorrow with your little one. I want to see him, get acquainted. I love children. Thanks to the unexpected inheritance and meeting with Edward, Veronica's life did start to change gradually for the better. She cleaned up the house and moved there with her son. The living conditions were ideal, a vast supply of firewood, a well with water, a solid stove, and furniture, albeit old-fashioned but sturdy and very comfortable. Apparently, Grandpa was a thrifty owner. Michael enjoyed the village, running around the yard, indulging in raspberries and sweet apples, eating better, and sleeping soundly. Veronica quickly connected with the neighbors. They were delighted that the house was no longer vacant and helped the woman in the initial stages. Laura, a neighbor, even shared many interesting stories about Grandpa and their family. Derek was known throughout the village. He was a strong man, a master who worked in the fields until he was 70. His wife, Margaret, died early, and he raised his daughter, Maria, your mom, on his own. He cherished hopes that she would live here in the village, get married, and have children. She had a suitor, a local guy named Ernest, but everything turned out differently. After school, Maria planned to go to the city, claiming there was nothing to do here. She wasn't in a hurry to get married either. She wanted to make a name for herself among people. She had a serious quarrel with her father back then. He shouted that if she returned pregnant, he wouldn't let her in. Maria disappeared for about a year, and when she returned, rumors circulated that she was pregnant without a husband. She hoped her father would forgive her and accept her back home, but Derek didn't forgive. He kicked her out, thinking she disgraced him in the eyes of the whole region. We haven't seen Maria in the village since then. Derek became grim and reclusive, but he knew his business, took care of the house, and did repairs. We all wondered why, for whom, and he always replied sharply, "None of your business. It's for my granddaughter." But he never communicated with his daughter until the very end. He died alone, a thrombus detached. We all escorted him on his final journey, thinking maybe some relatives would come to the funeral. It didn't happen as expected. Veronica listened and cried. She felt so ashamed now. It was clear why her mom categorically avoided any conversation about Grandpa and never communicated with him. "I'm sorry. I didn't know anything and never saw Grandpa. Mom didn't like these talks and kept everything secret. Where is Grandpa buried? Will you show me? I want to repent and apologize for everything." They went with the neighbor to the local cemetery. Veronica tidied up her grandfather's grave, painted the fence, pulled out weeds, and planted flowers, many of which grew in his yard. Apparently, Grandpa loved those flowers a lot. The granddaughter cried at her grandfather's grave, asking for forgiveness for not visiting, for not being at the funeral. Laura comforted her, saying, "Enough of that. It's an old story. Derek up there is probably delighted that you are now living in his house with his great-grandson. It was his cherished dream. I think he regretted many times treating his daughter so harshly, but he had a tough character and couldn't bring himself to ask for forgiveness." Veronica slowly settled in. She and her son got a puppy, and the little one happily played with it, scratching it behind the ears, and the puppy joyfully whimpered. Edward recovered and began visiting them frequently. As promised, he set up a workspace for Veronica, brought a sewing machine and materials, and explained what to do. The girl was very nervous when she sewed her first order, wondering if Edward would like it and if she could handle it. Surprisingly, things went well, and soon Veronica received her first payment. Her happiness knew no bounds. Her son behaved well, didn't disturb her while working, mostly played in the yard with the dog, and Laura kept an eye on him. Understanding that the young mother needed to earn a living, she advised Veronica and often said, "You've repeated your mother's fate. It must be tough raising a child alone. Well, look, there's a suitor who visits you, prominent and decent. Maybe you'll get along with him, and you'll have a family." Veronica just laughed. "Come on, Laura. He's just my friend Edward. I saved him first, and now he's helping me. That's all. I'm not what he needs with another person's child." But the woman shook her head. "I've lived a long life, and I know for sure he wouldn't bother with you just like that if he didn't like you. He's fallen for you, I'm sure. And the child, real men don't mind other people's kids, but fools find even their own a burden. So take a closer look at the suitor." Veronica pondered over the woman's words and started looking at Edward in a completely different way. After all, he often visited them not only for work, happily interacted with Michael, brought in toys and treats, and looked at her for a long time, intently and somewhat sadly. In reality, Edward also liked Veronica, but she was convinced that she wasn't what he needed with someone else's child. After all, Adam ran away from his own child, and here she was, raising someone else's. Today, Edward arrived very late. Michael had long been asleep. Veronica was finishing sewing a set of bed linen and getting ready to go to bed, so she was very surprised by his visit. She invited him into the house, started bustling around in the kitchen. "You're so late today, and you look very upset. What happened? Would you like to eat? I have chicken soup." Edward silently laid a bottle of brandy, a lemon, sausages, cheese, and fruits on the table. Then he said softly, "Will you have a drink with me, please? I really need it right now. It's been a tough day. They put Gregory in prison, and I met with him today. You can't imagine how bad I feel right now." Veronica understood everything, silently brought glasses, sliced the food, poured drinks, and they drank, nibbling on lemons. Edward sighed and began to tell his story. I asked him honestly, why did he betray me? What did I do to offend him? I genuinely didn't understand. Everything was fine, we didn't even argue. And you know what he told me? I can't even repeat it. It turns out Gregory envied me since childhood, even from the orphanage. And when I was chosen by adoptive parents instead of him, he harbored resentment against me. Can you imagine that? But how am I to blame for that? Envy ate him up inside that I lived in wealth while he languished in the orphanage. And all my gifts, the fancy phone, the things I sometimes brought him, he considered bribes. But I genuinely helped him from the bottom of my heart, even though my parents didn't approve. And when I invited him to work, he dreamed of getting rid of me and taking over the company. He consciously left me to die in the underground, knowing that no one would find me there with a cracked skull, without food and water. I wouldn't have lasted long anyway, and all this time he lived, ate, slept, and his conscience didn't bother him. It's a good thing there are reliable people in my company. Master Hibbert suspected something was wrong and started transferring most of the earnings through accounting to a separate account so Gregory wouldn't know. He didn't believe that I would abandon my creation and flee abroad. Why? For what reason? They were already planning to go to the police and declare me wanted as a team. I looked at Gregory and realized he was not my friend but a monster. There's nothing human in him. Well, at least now he'll get a long sentence in prison. I'll make sure of it, but it doesn't make it any easier on my soul. Thanks to you again, Veronica. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be in this world for a long time. They drank a bit more, and the girl got quite drunk because she had never consumed strong drinks before. Before she could sober up, Edward approached her, hugged her tightly, and started kissing her. Everything inside Veronica turned upside down. Millions of butterflies fluttered in her stomach. Edward whispered to her, I love you, dear. I don't want to leave. Can I stay? Please don't send me away. I beg you. I feel so good with you, and I'm ready to raise Michael as my own son. Let's try to become one family, if, of course, you feel the same way about me. Tell me, do you like me? Tears welled up in Veronica's eyes. She nodded and quietly said, I agree. I love you too. I was just afraid to say. From that day on, Edward and Veronica started living together in her grandfather's country house. Surprisingly, the man really liked it there. The air was so fresh, the silence, the freedom. It wasn't too far to drive to work, and in the evenings, they now went fishing together or just sat by the river. They were absolutely happy. It was an ordinary weekend. The family was having breakfast in the kitchen. Michael now tried to mimic Edward in everything and ate oatmeal without extra persuasion. Veronica drank coffee with a sandwich and admired her beloved men. Suddenly, someone knocked on the gate. The sound of a car was heard from behind the yard. The surprised girl went to open it. She was simply stunned when she saw Bernard, the restaurant director, on the doorstep. The man held a bouquet of flowers and a huge cake. He shifted from foot to foot, exhaled, and began, Good morning, Veronica. You've traveled quite far. I barely found you. I came to ask for your forgiveness. I admit I didn't understand the situation back then and fired you for no reason. I embarrassed you. Forgive me, you're not guilty of anything. He handed her the bouquet and cake. She gestured for him to come in, seated him in the kitchen, poured aromatic tea, and replied, I'm glad everything got cleared up, Bernard. But how did you find out the truth? I'm very curious. Your wife yelled in my face that I was a thief. I barely survived that disgrace. By the way, meet my fiancé, Edward, and this is my son, Michael. Bernard introduced himself as well and began to explain, after your dismissal, I couldn't believe that you stole that pen. Then the cleaner approached me and whispered that she saw my wife, Janet, throw the pen to you, but she was afraid to say it out loud during the scandal. So, I decided to review the surveillance camera footage, and indeed, that's what happened. It's clearly seen that Janet took my pen in my office and put it in your apron during lunch while you were at the store. I just couldn't believe it and had a confrontation at home. Janet admitted everything. The worst part is that she didn't regret it at all. Silly woman, she was jealous of you to me, not understanding that you're suitable for me as a daughter. I decided to correct my mistake because you suffered for no reason. I hired detectives to find out where you live, and here I am. I deeply apologize. Forgive me, Veronica. If you want to come back, I'd be delighted. No one worked as diligently as you did. The girl smiled and replied, No, thank you. Now I have a job I love, and it brings me joy. So everything that happens is for the best. But still, thank you for coming in person and apologizing. Now I feel relieved. Not every director can admit their mistakes. The conversation seemed to be over, but the director still didn't leave. He kept staring intently at the girl as if hesitating to say something more. Veronica asked directly, You're looking at me so strangely. It's making me uncomfortable. Come on, say it already. Don't hold back. The man took a sip of tea and gathered the courage to say, Yes, that's not all, and it's not even the most important reason I came here. It turns out your mom is my first love. We had a passionate romance in our youth. We even wanted to get married. You see, Veronica, you're my biological daughter. Is it really true? The girl said. Oh, really? Very interesting. And where have you been all these years, Daddy? Why didn't you help? Didn't communicate? Why did you leave Mom? Why? What do you want now? Do you think I'll run into your arms and cry? Do you even know how hard it was for Mom and me to live? I didn't have a single new toy in my childhood. I was teased as a pauper at school. Why didn't you think of us even once all these years? The man lowered his eyes. His daughter was right. I know I'm a very bad father, but don't rush to judge. Hear me out. Your mom and I loved each other deeply, but I was still a student, and my parents strongly opposed our marriage. I wasn't ready for fatherhood back then. I was young and foolish. Maria and I had a big fight. She was proud, with character. She got offended and left, disappearing from my life. You understand? Later, I regretted it and tried to find her, but she didn't even leave an address. Life punished me for that. I lived with my first wife for 5 years, got divorced, then married Janet, thinking she loved me. But it turned out she was only interested in my money. Detectives found out that she had a lover for a long time. We've already divorced, and God never gave me any children, although I dreamed so much about them. I understand this is not an excuse, but life has passed, and you can't turn back time. We can now mend our relationship, right? Michael is my real grandson. I would like to take care of him. Forgive me, my daughter. I beg you. Veronica was indignant and sharply replied, I'm sorry. I'm not ready to talk about this yet. I need to think about everything, sort it all out in my head. Bernard placed his business card on the table and, leaving, asked, Okay, I understand you, Veronica. If you want to communicate, call me, please. I'll be waiting eagerly. You and Michael are the dearest people to me now, and I'm ready to do anything for you." The director left, and suddenly Veronica burst into tears. She was outraged. "How can he do that, Edward? He lived his whole life for his pleasure, and Mom and I lived in poverty. Mom was so sick, dying in my arms. And where was he? I was left alone after giving birth without support. Where was my daddy? And now what? He shows up?" Edward listened silently, shaking his head, then replied, "Don't be too upset, my love. Yes, your father didn't raise you, and he wasn't there for you. You're right about that. But look at it from another perspective. You've told me yourself that your mom didn't communicate with her father. You didn't know your grandfather, and you regret it a lot, don't you? And now you are condemning Michael to the same fate. What did he do wrong? Why can't a biological grandfather communicate with his grandson? Tell me. I'm an orphan myself, raised by foster parents, and I'm grateful to them. But believe me, if my biological mother or father found me now and repented, I would forgive them everything just to hug a relative. Your father will answer for his sins himself. There's no need to judge him. Try to find the strength within you to forgive childhood grievances. It will make you feel better. Give your father a second chance. Everyone deserves one." Bernard seemed very sincere, a decent man in my opinion, but of course, the decision is yours. For a whole week, Veronica struggled with her thoughts. She repeatedly recalled her childhood, her beloved mom, looked at Michael, and the sad eyes of her father, and his words of repentance kept resurfacing. Eventually, she gathered the courage to call him. "Hello, Dad. I've been thinking, and who will benefit if we don't communicate? In short, come visit us. Michael and I are looking forward to seeing you." The man, with a trembling voice, replied, "Thank you, sweetheart. I've been waiting for your call. Wait, I'm on my way." Veronica was very nervous. She and Edward prepared a delicious dinner and spoke to Michael, saying, "Michael, your grandpa will be here soon. He searched for us for a long time and wants to be friends with you." The little one was thrilled and took his place at the gate, eagerly awaiting the guest. Finally, the long-awaited car pulled up. Bernard saw the child and broke into a smile. He immediately reached into a bag, pulling out a large radio-controlled car, handing it to his grandson. "Hello, Michael. I'm your grandpa. I came to visit you. This is a gift from me to you. Shall we be friends?" He extended his hands to the child, who, smiling, walked towards him. The man embraced the child so tenderly, kissed his cheek, and whispered, "What a blessing to have you now, Michael." Veronica came forward to greet him, smiling warmly and suppressing her emotions. She embraced her father first and whispered quietly, "Well, hello, Daddy. Let's go inside. Everything is ready. We'll have dinner and get to know each other again." Together, they had a heartfelt time talking a lot. Bernard bonded with his grandson, and Edward, Veronica, and Bernard went through family photos, shedding tears together as they reminisced about Mom. Veronica's heart truly felt lighter, and she was glad that her father had found them after all. Blood ties should be together. From that day on, the lives of all our characters changed significantly. They became a close-knit family. Bernard offered Veronica a job as an administrator in the restaurant, but she declined, as childhood only happens once and she wanted to dedicate all her time to her son and Edward. The grandfather showered his grandson with love, buying him many new things, setting up a children's sports slide in his room, and taking him to the pool 3 times a week, a place Michael loved to swim. Edward permanently moved in with Veronica. He renovated the house and soon they got married. Veronica finally found her happiness right here in her grandfather's house. It came alive, exuding a special order of calm and comfort. Edward adopted Michael and sincerely considered him his own son, while the little one started calling him Dad. One day, The head of the family took everyone to the city to the children's clinic, as it was time for Michael's vaccination. The child was very nervous and scared, like all kids. Veronica tried to reassure him as much as she could, but when it was their turn, Michael suddenly took Edward's hand and said, "I'll go with Dad. I'm not scared with him." They entered the doctor's office together, and a few minutes later, Edward came out holding the child. Michael wasn't crying at all. The man smiled. "Here, my dear. What a hero our son is, my best son, brave like his dad." He didn't cry at all. Veronica kissed Michael first, then Edward, and began praising the little one. One of the electricians working on installing internet cables in the offices observed this scene. He couldn't take his eyes off Veronica, closely examining Edward and the child, his fists clenched. She has become such a beauty, nothing like before. A naive girl with no money, and her husband is clearly wealthy. Look how well dressed they all are, and the little boy calls him Dad, kisses him. A perfect family. It's sickening. It was Adam. He came home after work. His elderly mother was washing dishes, and his father was watching football. Adam couldn't hold back and almost shouted, "Do you know who I met today?" "Huh, Veronica? Remember her? Everything is perfect for her, a rich husband and a son, my son, who calls another man Dad. Are you happy, Mom? You were so delighted that I left Veronica and went to someone else. Well, what about it? So what if she's older? Money is what matters most. I thought so myself, and now where is this Madison? She played with me like a young colt for a year and kicked me out of her luxurious apartment. That's it. Love is over. What am I left with? Mom and I could have lived with Veronica, raised my son. What a fool I was to listen to you back then." His mother cried, wiping tears with a handkerchief, and his father replied sharply, "So you didn't love Veronica, son? I would never have left your mother for anything, no matter what anyone advised me. Money was always on your mind, so you made your choice. Don't blame us for your mistakes." Adam waved his hand, went to his room, collapsed on the couch, and covered his face with his hands. How he regretted betraying Veronica, so cruel, but it was already too late. Veronica watched as Edward lovingly cared for Michael, realizing how lucky she was. He was everything to her: support, strength, a strong shoulder, and the best husband in the world.